We all know chasing storms is dangerous, but who knew it could be delicious too? This is the Stormchaser single malt from Sailor's Home. Let me tell you about it. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this is the Stormchaser single malt from Sailor's Home. So let me get into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, Sailor's Home are a brand that are sourcing whiskey, but they're not just sourcing any whiskey, they're sourcing whiskey under the guidance of Jack O'Shea. Now, if you're not familiar with Jack O'Shea, I'll put a picture of him up there so you can see what he looks like, but suffice it to say, he's one of the icons of the Irish whiskey industry. Between helping brands kind of set up their distillery, helping them get off their feet, to helping brands source whiskey, or even being the president of the Irish Whiskey Society until very recently, he's one of these people who's just well known in the industry, and his voice carries a lot of weight, even though he can be a bit soft spoken at times, because he knows what he's doing and he knows how to make some very good whiskies. And that's what he's doing here with Sailor's Home Irish Whiskey. Now, he's helping them find and source some really good whiskies and then finish them and blend them in ways to make something very, very tasty and hopefully a bit unique. Now, myself and Rose actually met Jack at Whiskey Live Dublin, and we had a good chat to him about the different types of whiskey that Sailor's Home are producing, between their blends or like the Horizon series or the ones they've got finished in Caribbean rum casks. Some very, very interesting whiskies, some nice pot stills, some nice blends, but he was really excited about this one, the Stormchaser, and I can see why, because it's a very, very tasty whiskey. It's a single malt whiskey that comes in at 46% ABV, and it's got a bit of a wild profile because, as they say, it's been quadruple casked. So you can think of this as being essentially made up of two core components that are 5 and 6 years old. So part of it was aged in virgin American oak casks and part of it was aged in bourbon casks. Part of it was finished in oatmeal stout casks and part of it was finished in madeira wine casks. So it's going to give us a lot of spice, it's going to give us a lot of vanilla, it's going to give us some nice kind of coffee and chocolate notes, and it's going to give us some nice fruity berry notes. And if you're not really familiar with a stout finished whiskey, yes, it can give you coffee, and yes, it can give you kind of chocolate and really nice dark kind of creamy notes, but oftentimes you do get a nice kind of a winter dark fruitiness, a dark berry note coming through, and I think that will compare very well with the fruity notes you're going to get with the wine cask. So it should be a very interesting, fun, fruity, tasty whiskey. They say that this is the first time this combination of casks has been used in Irish whiskey, and that's kind of why they call it the Stormchaser, because it's chasing a bit of danger. It's on the edge of danger, but it's still going to be safe, it's still going to be tasty, it's still going to be enjoyable whiskey. So let's not waste any more time talking, let's get into the nose on the Stormchaser. Cheers. Okay, immediately very fruity. That nose jumps out of the glass with kind of blackberries, black kind of cherry, really dark, deep, fruity notes. I wouldn't really say that they're like stewed fruits. I wouldn't say that they've been like cooked or been reduced down. I'd say they're more fresh, like there's that bit of zing, a bit of zest to them. A nice kind of bright, while still being dark fruits, but that fresh, dark fruit note. And then behind that we've got obviously some really nice, rich kind of espresso, maybe some dark kind of chocolate notes coming through, but not really like a bitter note, more of like a creamy, almost like an oaty note coming through, like a really nice kind of leveled out. Like it's not bitter, it's more like a creamy, like if you imagine like an espresso that has a little touch of milk in it, or like a dark chocolate that's not super dark but it's still nice and rich. That kind of note is coming in. And as well, we're obviously going to get some nice kind of malty, biscuity notes coming through, some kind of almost honey sweetness, and a little bit of caramel as well I'm getting, but yeah, more of the honey than the caramel. In terms of spice, I'm not really getting a huge amount of spice. I mean, with the virgin oak, I'd be expecting maybe a little bit more spice coming through, but I think all those extra finishes that are just layered on top of the virgin oak, not really getting a huge amount of spice. Like there's maybe a hint of baking spice at the very end underneath everything, but it's mostly those kind of coffee, chocolate, fruity notes with obviously the vanilla, the kind of maltiness and that kind of honey sweetness coming through. So let's go in for the palate on the Stormchaser. Cheers. Immediately I'm getting this kind of rich creaminess. More of that creaminess from the nose is coming through into the palate, getting this nice kind of richness, a really nice kind of creamy mouthfeel coating my mouth, giving me a nice rich kind of experience when I'm tasting it. But then behind that is that maltiness, is that honeyness, like really nice, like a honey malty biscuit coming through, really nice and flavorful. And then behind that, I'm getting more of those kind of coffee notes, more of those espresso notes, those dark chocolate notes that I was getting in the nose, but it definitely leads up with this nice, rich, kind of creamy texture. I wasn't really getting much of the fruits on that first sip, so I'm gonna go in again for a second sip and see if I can find the fruitiness again. Cheers. Second sip round, I'm definitely getting more of those fruitiness, like the creaminess is up front, yes, that maltiness is up front, yes, and that chocolate and that coffee note is there. But then behind that, you do get that fruity note. Like it's kind of like if you imagine a chocolate covered cherry, like when you bite into it, you get that, you know, dark chocolate up front, and then you get that cherry note, that sweetness, a bit of fruitiness behind the chocolate, kind of nice and balanced, actually quite nice and rich, very fruity, very still in there, but leading up front with that creaminess, leading up front with that chocolate, with that coffee and that maltiness. I'm also getting more of the spice, and I know I said on the nose I wasn't really getting a huge amount of spice. As it's there sitting in my palate, as I'm tasting it, I'm getting a little bit more of that spiciness, that kind of oak spice coming through. So I'm gonna go in again for the finish and we'll see how that spiciness develops. Cheers. It's quite a clean finish, like that creaminess, that creamy mouthfeel does help kind of prevent any alcohol burn because you're getting a nice kind of creamy texture over everything. But as the finish is fading, I'm getting that maltiness, I'm getting that that kind of chocolate covered cherry note I was mentioning, a bit of those coffee notes and that creamy notes. But as those kind of fade away, the spice does come up to the fore. So the spice that had been hiding in the nose, that was becoming a little bit more apparent into the palate, it's there in the finish. You get this nice kind of oak spice coming up, kind of helping balance things out because it keeps things a little bit different. You're not just staying with the same notes from the nose into the palate into the finish. You do get something a little bit different, and that's something I do appreciate when the whiskey does have a bit of a journey through it. But those fruity notes have probably faded away the most, leaving me with that oak spice, leaving me with that maltiness, that kind of creamy texture, and the chocolate and the coffee note kind of lingering on. All in all, I think this is actually a very nice whiskey. I mean, it is only 5 to 6 years old, but because of all the casks, because of the different finishing, it does have a little bit more depth than you might think for that kind of age. Also because it is on the younger side, that kind of stoutiness, that stouty creaminess does help prevent it tasting really like a young whiskey, but it is a very, very nice, tasty whiskey. I can definitely see, even though this was just released a couple of weeks ago, it had already won an International Spirits Competition award. I won a gold medal at the ISC, so I can definitely see why it was a very, very highly sought after whiskey. I've seen online that you can find this from between 45 and like 60 euro, so it's a very good whiskey, I think, if you can find it, especially at those kind of prices. It's definitely one you should keep an eye out for. Sailor's Home are making some very nice whiskeys. I'm going to keep on enjoying this. I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays, cocktail recipes on Fridays, and sometimes fun videos on Mondays. So if you want to see more like that, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.